Double the fun. The woods were definitely changing. Aurora and Phillip could no longer see the sky at all because of the ancient tall trees that stretched far overhead. Pines and other shaggy bark species shot 30 meters straight up on massive trunks, some of which were as thick as a small house. The canopies that spread out at their tops blocked out most of the sun. Only a rare dappled shaft made it through. But it didn't feel claustrophobic. The absence of light kept the undergrowth low. Moss and ancient fallen logs, puddles of shade flowers, mushrooms, and tiny lilies. It was airy and endless, like the largest cathedral ever imagined. The prince and princess walked with light hearts, tiny figures in this primeval world, seemingly the only ones in it. "We are now getting close to the heart of the forest, where the cottage should be," Phillip said cheerfully. "It doesn't exactly look like it does in the real world, but it's close enough. We should get there by late tomorrow morning." But the more deeply they progressed, the more her memories came back. Like suddenly being whacked in the head by a small rock, a crystalline image would explode in the inside of her mind and she would reel for a moment. A hand that looked like hers, but smaller, reaching for a perfect late spring flower, a surprisingly large and yellow pollen-covered spider suddenly dropping out of its hiding place in the blossom's center. Her aunts not understanding the innate fear she had of a loud, violent thunderstorm, impatient and almost looking like they would rather be out there themselves, but rocking her nonetheless, cuddling her close, uncomprehending but loving. A sudden glimpse of one of her forest walkabouts at the edges of things, the end of the forest, the turrets of a castle. Not only did the images come faster and longer, but each one raised a host of immediate questions and realizations that Aurora couldn't stop. Why was I never brave enough to travel all the way to the castle? Holy crow, that was my castle? Wait, the real one, without the thorns. And then the headaches would begin in earnest. Sometimes it wasn't a single image, but a string of memories connected by a feeling or a thought. Those hit her less like a rock, and more like an angry bull, slamming her head and grinding her innards with its sharp hooves. Like her studies, one of her aunt's whims. Several months of practicing beautiful runes that became gold no matter what she drew them with, ink and quill, chalk on rock, stick in mud. No problems at all remembering and copying them. Some flurry of realization from her aunts and then a replacement. 25 ugly letters that stayed the same colour as the ink. These were just as easy to remember as the golden ones, though. And it was all game. Not like learning in the world of the Thorn Castle. Not at all. The few things the fairies bothered to teach her came as easily as singing. As the new and real memories revealed themselves, Aurora Rose found she had a growing collection of 2 different versions of the same scene, the same day, the same year, both of which fought for space and dominance in her mind. She remembered being a young teenager, bored for days on end in the middle of the woods, impatient for something to happen, trying to hunt with the foxes, climbing trees as high as she could, lying in despair at their bases, no longer loving the happy, mindless babble of her aunts as they worked together to make dinner or wash their clothes. Its sister memory in the Thorn Castle was of young Aurora confronting her neglectful parents, who, worse than being enraged by her sight, worse than ordering her out of their presence, just didn't care. Like she wasn't worth getting upset about. She found empty rooms in the keep and collapsed on sofas for days, wondering what would happen if she died. Would anyone notice? She became hungry and would sometimes rally to find a bit of food, and she grew very, very dirty. She didn't have time to succumb to these memories, to pass out, to be weak, to throw up and recover, and stumble a few steps, then collapse again. Phillip had said that if she didn't have many more spells, they would be there in a couple of hours, and he was very patient. But she wanted to go on. Sometimes concentrating on one lovely thing about each memory helped her remain upright, like the foxes. She had hunted with foxes! Beautiful red-coated beasts who sometimes tangled under her feet like cats, and let her scratch their throats. That had really happened! Focusing on their beauty kept her walking, shakily, and kept her stomach from reeling. Sometimes concentrating on one enraging thing kept her going. How could the women who had loved her and rocked her and raised her lie to her for 16 years? How could anyone do that and still claim to love you? They could have told her the truth, that she was a princess in hiding, and at worst it would have been a lovely game for her to play when she dressed up. At best it would have been a distracting, interesting thing to ponder on her most monotonous days. The jolt of fury about her false childhood in the woods and her aunt's betrayal of her trust was far stronger than her body's weak inclination to black out or lose breakfast. It even quickened her pace a little. But after several hours, even that was getting hard to keep feeling worked up about, and she found herself beginning to stumble. "I think we'd better call it a day," Phillip suggested. It feels like it's getting late, maybe an hour before sundown. Let's make camp and get an early start tomorrow. She nodded, too tired to disagree or to say anything to make him feel better or to apologize. She sat there like a limp ragdoll while he bustled around, pushing piles of unbelievably long, unbelievably soft pine needles into springy mattresses, and clearing them entirely out of one area for a small fire. When he had the tinder in a nice little pyramid structure of twigs set up, he coughed politely and pointed at it. She nodded and flicked her finger. In a moment, a cozy bright orange fire was flickering, the only tiny light in the whole twilight forest. Summoning a whole cottage might have been nicer, but it would have taken a lot more time and too much out of her. Probably. She still wasn't sure how this all worked. She didn't even have to snap her fingers or blink to make 2 bowls of porridge appear. Phillip tried not to sigh, but took it as gracefully as he could manage. I think I understand a little how Maleficent's magic works, she said after a moment, thinking about magic. The events are different, but the feelings are the same. She continued slowly, trying to put it into words that made sense. She worked with what was already in my head and just gave it new pictures, sort of. My confinement in the castle was based on the feeling of being trapped, with nowhere to go, figuratively or literally. Nothing to do but pace my cage until I died. She built an entire world around that premise to keep me asleep and under her control, but in a weird way, she was the most interesting thing that happened to me in either life. The direction her thoughts were taking was obviously making Phillip uncomfortable. He finished his porridge, still hungry but not necessarily eager for more. He stretched back, despite his desire to press on. He was exhausted as well. Hey, he said, suddenly sitting up eager. Can I see your sword? The one you summoned? Glad to have something she could reward his patience with, she handed it over with a smile. The prince pulled out his own to compare. It's truly amazing, he said, running his fingers over each. A perfect copy. Funny, I never paid attention to swords before, not even yours. Well, I didn't wear it openly when I travelled. I kept it under wraps, as it were. This is the sword of a royal prince, the son of a king. My father had it made for me when I turned 16 years old. It would be dangerous to display it openly. Dangerous to wear a sword where you can get to it quickly? I am an extremely skilled swordsman, Phillip said gently, but no match for a band of highwaymen. A feisty noble lad on a horse they might be willing to let pass. The son of a king is good for quite a bit of a ransom. Ah, Aurora said, nodding. So that's why I didn't see it with you when... She frowned, trying to bring up the memory. When... Phillip watched her uneasily. I never saw you with the sword, she said flatly, because you kept it hidden. Phillip had a very unprincely, funny look on his face, only she didn't find it funny at all. You never told me you were a prince. I was going to tell you, he protested. I was going to tell you that night, in fact. That night, she demanded. Despite her physical exhaustion, she stood up, rage flushing her body straight. Her fists clenched of their own accord. Why not like immediately? Just when was the right moment? Rose, listen. He stood up and took her hands. She whipped them out of his fingers. I was travelling that day to your father's castle. I was going to be formally introduced as a son-in-law to your parents and the rest of the court, to say hello to a bride I had never met, and goodbye to a life I had barely begun to enjoy. So, she demanded, you decided you would have a last fling with some village girl or woman's daughter before being forced into a life of marriage? No. Listen. I'm a prince. Apart from high-born ladies and princesses and what have you, you can't tell anyone you're a prince. Nobody likes you for just who you are. Girls, they assume... Everyone thinks they can get something if they have a prince. His cheeks grew pinker and began to stutter as he tried to explain. It didn't change the severe look she gave him. As soon as you tell a girl you're a prince, they're all over you, he said desperately, in the wrong way. You just hear prince and think of riches or whatever. Especially if they get... if there's a... Look, can't we leave it at that? No, we can't, the princess said. You were the one person I thought I could trust. The one person from my past. My real past. The love I forgot. Her lips began to twist, and she felt her nose seize up with incipient tears. As it turns out you, also you, even you, lied to me. Like everyone else in my entire life. No one has ever told me the truth about anything. Not even you. Well, I didn't know who you were, really, that you were a princess. Not my fault, she snapped. I didn't know that either. Don't you dare think of blaming me or comparing us. Philip took a deep breath. He looked up and around, as if trying to gather help from the sky or the air or the trees around them. I'm sorry, I really am. I realize there's no way to prove this to you now, but the day of Princess Aurora and Prince Philip's wedding, I told my dad I wasn't marrying the princess. I was marrying the peasant girl I met in the forest. Because everything else in your life might have been a lie, but my loving you wasn't. Isn't. She didn't say anything. She still glared at him, trembling with rage. I'm going to sleep now, she said through clenched teeth. I'm putting both swords between us. I hope you cut your elbow. They lay down on their pallets, Philip sadly and warily, she jerkily and angrily. She covered herself with pine needles. When he started to offer her his cape, she growled, Don't you dare. He sighed and wrapped himself up. Good night, he whispered. She turned herself on her side away from him. It was a long time before she finally fell asleep. The next morning felt like just the sort of new beginning she needed. Nothing was weird or indicative of anything magical or evil. She breathed in the clean air and listened to the breathtakingly still silence of the ancient forest. She looked up at the trees, feeling tiny and incredibly lucky and special. Small birds, hidden somewhere in the lightening night gloom, made little echoey chirps. She was overcome with a desire to stay. This was nice. Here it was beautiful, and she had incredible powers. Who knew what the real world held for her when all this was done? Forgive me yet? And then all the exhaustion and emotional stress from the day before came crashing back down on her shoulders. Philip was on his side, Chimpanzee in his hands, looking at her and trying to be fetching. Aurora Rose grunted unprincessly and wished she had covers she could roll over and pull them aggressively over her head. Please, he asked, smiling willingly. He didn't quite bat his eyelashes. Let's just get this done with, she said, meaning find the fairies, figure out how to delete Maleficent, defeat Maleficent, and wake up, and then deal with whatever aftermath there was. Were the two of them still engaged as prince and princess? What was she going to say to her parents? Everything made her irritable. Why couldn't he just have stayed asleep longer and let her enjoy the peace of the forest by herself for a few minutes? The rare peace of her own deep innermost mind. "Aw," he said with a pout. "What about a kiss? And I'll eventually forgive you a kiss," she said at him, one eyebrow raised like Maleficent. The rest of her face was a very un-Maleficent-like mask of shock and horror. Then she let Castle Aurora, ball-arranging Princess Aurora, take over, and the smooth look of cool hauteur came over her face. I shan't even dignify that with a response. She rose as primly as she could, resisting the urge to push the pine needles back into place, as if she was making her bed Briar Rose style. Philip sighed dramatically and didn't get up, contenting himself with watching her. She kept her back to him. Then Philip came striding into the clearing, a string of fish over his shoulder. I was trying to think of some way of apologizing, but there don't seem to be any flowers here. In fact, there's not a lot of anything here, and I thought you'd be sick of porridge too, and... He stopped, staring at the angry couple. Aurora stared at him. Philip on the ground stared at him. Philip with the fish dropped the fish and immediately drew his sword. Rose, get back, Philip on the ground said, leaping up. It's Lord of Maleficent's demons. He's the demon, Philip with the fish said, cheeks flushed with anger. Right, Grand Philip said, casually drawing his own sword. Who was sleeping here next to Rose all night while you just happened to come walking in? I got up 2 hours ago, Fish Philip said. I couldn't sleep because of our fight. Really? Because I slept just fine, Grand Philip said with a knowing smile. And somehow she did. Right through your getting up and... What is it you were doing? Fishing? Really? Rose looked back and forth between them uncertainly. The fishing was strange, despite his obvious towering of porridge. Did princes even know how to fish? I like fishing, Fish Philip protested. Even Roman emperors fished. To relax. Ha, now you know he's a demon, Grand Philip said, laughing. I'm terrible at Latin, you know that. That was true. But was Grand Philip acting not like Philip? But then who was Philip, besides a liar? Wait, hush, she said, thinking hard. They both waited with the same patient, expectant expression. What's the name of your horse? She said slowly. Samson, they answered at the same time. Grand Philip shrugged, Fish Philip glared. All right, what? She dug deep into memories that only recently had been uncovered. What kind of flower did you pick and give me the day we met? Jonquil, said Grand Philip. I don't know, Phillip said, exasperated. I don't know the names of flowers. It was tiny and yellow and spelled pretty, like you. Nice, Phillip said, rolling his eyes and smirking. Very poetic. She frowned. That seemed like a mean thing for the otherwise good-natured Phillip to say. She tried to think logically. Something she now knew was difficult in a dream. Maleficent was inside her head, and able to summon an entire world out of her thoughts and memories. The evil fairy knew everything about Aurora Rose, and so probably did her servants. But she didn't know everything about Phillip. Not the things that had happened before he met the princess. Tell me your most important childhood memory, she said finally. Phillip spoke first. My father gave me my first sword, a wooden one, on my 3rd birthday. I named it Cat, because what I really wanted was a cat. And Phillip threw his hands up. You could make up anything, he said with exasperation. I could make up anything. Rose wouldn't know the truth. Sure, I had a sword when I was 3 and named it Cat. It was a kiss Dairy Maid when I was 13 next to the fire in the kitchen. I absolutely did it, but it's also the sort of thing any prince, any boy could be reasonably expected to do. Is it true? Can you prove it? Phillip frowned. Real hate began to burn in his eyes. I did kiss a Dairy Maid when I was 13, but it was outside, near the cows. See, Phillip said. She bit her lip. He was right. Was there any connection to Phillip in the real world she could draw on? Something they both knew somehow, she in the forest and he in his castle. Or in the Thorn Castle. Your father, she said, King Hubert. Tell me something about him. Both Phillips looked surprised. Phillip shrugged again. Pompous, loud, bossy, arrogant. Show some respect, Phillip growled. He's still my father. What did he look like? Really look like? His face, she pressed. Old, Phillip quipped. Phillip raised his sword. Enough, I said. Please use this excuse to attack me, Phillip spat. Because you can't describe it at all, you fake, he raised his own sword. Phillip sprang forwards, beating the other Phillip's weapon aside with a clang that rang out disturbingly among the ancient trees. Clouds of tiny birds high up exploded from the leaves and flew away. Both Phillips were fast, very fast. They were extremely skilled swordsmen, clearly trained by a master. They were perfectly matched, obviously. Neither could gain the upper hand, and each trick and tactic one came up with, the other had already thought about. Parry, spin, lunge, leap, surprise attack at the legs. It was actually quite beautiful. If it hadn't been such a dangerous situation, she would have enjoyed watching them. But she found herself drawing her own sword. She would not be unprepared, no matter who won. After a few minutes, the twins separated, breathing heavily. Neither had drawn blood. You're well trained, demon, said one Phillip. As are you, demon, said the other, giving the first a little salute. She didn't even know which one was Phillip and which one was Phillip anymore. They clashed again more furiously this time. One drew blood on the other's side, the other delivered a painful seeming blow with the flat of his sword to the other's head. Aurora Rose winced with each one. Finally, panting, they separated again. Here's the thing, said Phillip on the left, facing her. There's no way you can trust either of us. Maleficent's magic is too strong and perfect. And there's the other thing, the second Phillip said, with an arch look at his twin. Why would you trust either one of us? You've already seen that the real Phillip, whoever it is, it's me, by the way. It's me, you lying hellspawn! Whatever. You've already seen that the real Phillip can't be trusted anyway. I lied to you, just like you said, despite falling in love with you. I could just as easily lie to you again, for good reasons, he added quickly, seeing the look on her face. It could be for your own safety, or because it's too dangerous for us to be together, or whatever. How well do you really know me? Would you ever be able to trust me again, now that you know I lied to you? She put her hand to her head. The other Phillip looked sick, seeing the logic behind his twin's words and where it would go, but he didn't protest. For your own safety, for the safety of this quest, for the good of all the people who are depending on you, it would really be best if you went on. Alone. Aurora Rose felt a pain as great as the wound of her sword at these words, an invisible sword in her heart. It was the truth. And hadn't she always known that? She was always alone. She would always be alone. She was the only one she could trust, in both of her memories. Whether she was hiding in a giant maze of the Thorn Castle, or looking for something to do among the wild animals of the forest, or laying on her princess bed, hoping Lyanna would stay away, everything had always come down to just her. The other Phillip also looked pained at the words. But I love you, he said desperately. I want to be with you and protect you and help you. No, I do, the first Phillip said bleakly. All those things. This is the hardest thing I've ever done, but it's what's best. She knew she couldn't delay. If she did, she would be stuck there forever trying to decide. Another Maleficent trap. She turned to go, hoping she wouldn't hear the two boys begin their inevitable fighting again, clanging away in the forest of her mind forever. until she woke up. "I stole my mother's pearl earring," Phillip suddenly called out. She closed her eyes and kept going. "I stole it because it was pretty. That's all. Later, when she was dead and they found it, everyone asked if I stole it because I wanted a memory of her, and I said yes, even though I just wanted it because it was pretty, and it was when she was still alive. But this way everyone was nice to me, and I was forgiven, and everyone felt bad for me." She couldn't stop herself from turning round. What a weird thing for Phillip to say. The other Phillip thought so too. He looked at the first one with disgust. "Why would you tell her that about us?" But the first Phillip wasn't done yet. "When I was 10, when I was way too old not to know better, I told my sister Maria that she was prettier than Bridget. In front of Bridget." The Phillip who spoke looked sick and racked with guilt. The princess gripped her sword tighter but moved closer. "Once I caught a mouse and put it in a room with my cat and watched the cat play with it until it was dead. It was horrible and I wept for days after, and I went to confession about it, but I did it. I did it, because I wanted to see what would happen." "Sure, all right," the other Phillip said nervously. "Are we saying all this stuff now? Because I can do it too. I don't know why you'd want to tell her all this. I wet my bed till I was 13. Aurora Rose and the other Phillip both looked at him in shock. "I wet my bed until I was 13, Phillip continued a little hysterically. "Not all the time, but on many nights. My father was angry and the chambermaid was sworn to secrecy, and they whipped me and told me I was terrible, bringing shame to our name and lineage. Royal princes don't act that way. Royal princes do not wet their beds. But I did. Nobody else knows any of this, no one. I'm telling you because I love you, and I trust you with all my secrets, good and bad. I want you to know that you can trust me too. I know I lied to you, but I swear I will tell you everything about me from now on. All the bad stuff and all the good stuff too." He paused, looking bleak and weary. "Leave now, for the good of your kingdom, and for your own safety. Just know that, if you succeed, if we ever meet again, I will never ever lie to you about anything. Ever again. And I will spend the rest of my life doing whatever I can to make you forgive me." The other Phillip opened his mouth to say something, which was the opportunity she took to drive her sword through his stomach. The look on his face was human and terrible. Surprise, hurt, horror. His hands came round the shaft as blood began to flow down it, as if he could just pull it out and make everything better. Strange noises came out of his mouth. She staggered back, horrified by the mistake she had made. And then the blood turned black, and the noises turned to hissing. His body shivered and became something dark and not really there, snake-like and transparent. He vibrated and trembled and shivered. Finally, he fell to the ground like all the others. The remaining Phillip watched silently, his face white. It must be a horrible thing to watch yourself die, Aurora thought. But he recovered himself and strode forwards, giving the thing a coup de grace, a quick death the demon certainly didn't deserve. Then he dropped his sword, turned to the princess, wrapped her in his arms, and hugged her so tightly it almost hurt. She didn't say anything. There were too many things to talk about. How she had figured out it was really him, how she still didn't forgive him for lying before, how he wasn't always the perfect prince he seemed to be. How she would, in private, for the rest of their lives, no matter what happened, remind him of the things he had said that day. Just because. How she somehow just assumed she would know him for the rest of their lives. Forever. But she'd also just killed something that looked a whole lot like a real person when she stabbed him through the innards. That image replayed itself again and again in her mind. What if she had been wrong? So she stayed silent and let herself be held. Interlude. A pile of bodies was growing next to Maleficent's throne. It was a little shocking, maybe even distasteful. Never in her life had the fairy been messy or allowed herself to be surrounded by filth. The horde round her mostly didn't care, however they looked at the corpses with hunger. Diana rolled her eyes. "You're going through them too quickly. There's not going to be anyone left for you to rule." With a hiss and a movement that was far more redolent of a snaky dragon than a human queen, Maleficent cleared the space between her and the pig-footed handmaiden in the blink of an eye. She loomed over her, all arches and blackness. Liana didn't flinch. "I have less than an hour." "Excuse me, let me rephrase. We have less than an hour. If I don't get the princess back here by then, I could consume everyone in the castle, and it wouldn't matter. And what help have you been, my dear?" she added with a venomous drawl. "I have attacked her through all her weaknesses, and sent my best servants after her, all of whom who failed. What aren't you telling me? What dark secret of Aurora's heart can lead me to her defeat?" "I've told you everything about the princess," Liana said steadily. "Excuse me, let me rephrase. You already know everything I know." The evil fairy and the strange handmaiden stared into each other's eyes for a long moment. Neither looked away. The rest of Maleficent's creations grew nervous. They shifted from hoof to hoof, or claw to claw, and made uneasy whistling and whooping sounds. Maleficent pulled her lips back in a sneer, and spun around, concentrating on the image of the battered princess and prince. Her cape flew and settled behind her. Still, Liana didn't move. If anything, she seemed a little bored. Suddenly, Maleficent looked thoughtful. "But I don't have to know the darkest secrets of her heart," she said slowly. "I just have to encourage them." She raised her staff and looked into the depths of the orb, her yellow eyes further illuminated by whatever it was she saw there, and she began to chant.